Well, I always end late. I don't know if I've ever started this late in a long time. Couple announcements. First of all, next week we will be down the hall in room 200 again. It's a fine room, no problem with me as far as that's concerned. But there'll be a special Palm Sunday thing which will involve our children here. So look for us down the hall a bit. Uh, I'll see if I can negotiate coffee in our own room. The second thing is to say in advance, it's my goal to develop a Christmas and Easter season series. Now, I haven't finished formatting that because last year I did the same thing. And I'll need to take a hard look at what I did last year and then try to steer away from that to do something new. The lazy side of me says, oh, I could redo those. Nobody would remember, but I'm not going to do that. Um, so just to comment about that. But that will be interrupted, and I'm sorry to say that, by two consecutive Sundays at the end of April, the 20-something and the 30th. The 20-something is a Roanoke College spring trustees meeting and alumni weekend. And as trustees, we're expected at least to show up for alumni weekend. I often show up for breakfast and then sneak away. But that's lesson that week. The following week, I've been invited to Good Shepherd Church in Lancaster, which is the congregation we formed when we merged Advent and St. Mark's into a new congregation. Uh, the only issue I did not succeed at was my dream was that we would name the Church of the Resurrection, because two churches agreed to die so that the new church could be born. I lost to the Church of the Good Shepherd. It was popular in those days. It's about the time this congregation was organized too. They're celebrating their 50th anniversary, and they've invited me back for that weekend to be the preacher of the day. And my whatever just couldn't say no. So I'm going to miss 2 weeks, and I apologize for that now. Pastor Dave won't let 2 weeks go by without something happening in this hour. He's as uh, Wesleyan as I am, thinking that work justifies, so which kind of doctrine of that tradition in Christian theology. In fact, every now and again, Pastor Dave refers to me as a Wesleyan because he says, I think work justifies. In addition to that, just for the fun of commenting, our preacher today, who did a fine job, as he always does, Jan Lookingbill, came up to me a couple of months ago and said, are you ever going to quit? And he said, I couldn't do it. Well, I can't either sometimes. That's why I have the sidekick over here. So she's stretching out my time a little bit. Thank you and welcome back.
Thank you.
Good to have you. Linda's not here. I can't thank Linda for being our lector last week. The Lord be with you. Then let us pray. Merciful and gracious Lord, we give you thanks for this day, for the hymnody of this day, for the preaching of this day. We give you thanks. We ask your Spirit to be with us now as we talk about this awesome story of the raising of Lazarus, which was our theme and gospel of this morning. Bless this church. Bless our community. Bless our Sabbath. Bless our world. All these things we ask in Christ's name. Amen. This doesn't sound like it's as live as I'd like. There, but it's better. A comment about the layout of this paper. I would like to do what John's Gospel does. You know, we have Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and they conspired together. I'm not sure in a meeting, but in using one another's material and adding each their own tradition, Matthew's tradition, Luke's tradition, Mark. And so we have Mark's outline in all three of those Gospels, but then we have unique material. For example, one of the greatest storytellers is St. Luke. You know, it's St. Luke that gives us the parables. John gives us none. John gives us signs of miracles, but no real parables. Luke gives us parables. The waiting father, known better by the prodigal son, the lost coin, the lost sheep. That's all Luke's material. The manger, the shepherds, the angels singing, that's Luke. Mark doesn't give it to us, and Matthew gives us very little of it. Jeff, before you get seated, thank you for your part of this morning. Those hymns were awesome. Your fault, I know, so I'm thanking you. Luke is just awesome in his storytelling and the parables. John is different. His timelines are different. His understanding of the week of the Passion is different and probably more accurate than the three synoptic Gospels. And we're dealing with John today. John is one of the longest, if not the longest. I haven't checked recently. My memory's always non-trustable. John is 21 chapters. That's the longest, I think, of the four. But he tells us the few stories about Jesus, because John tells a story and then he teaches, and he tells a story and then he teaches, and he tells a story. So he tells us fewest stories. But, well, for example, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, Jesus. Is this coming and going? Is it just me? I'm sorry. So anyway, we'll just live with it. So today's paper is a little different. We'll read the gospel lesson today that they told us was long in advance. We'll read it in 4 sections this morning, or maybe even 5. And then, but before we read it, I'm going to do a background, kind of like John writes the gospel. I'm going to tell you what to expect in each, and then we will listen intelligently to the reading of that text. For example, the first third of the text is before the story begins. It's John giving us the background of the story he's about to tell. And it goes like this. Jesus is somewhere else. He's not in Bethany. In fact, he's not in Bethany because his life is already in danger. From another gospel source, we hear that he left the area of Jerusalem and Bethany. And Bethany is 1.5 miles. It says about 2 miles in the Bible. It's 1.5 miles, made worse by the Israeli wall that separates the city of Jerusalem and the town of Bethany. It is as high as this wall over here. I had a picture set aside and finally didn't use it, but it's an awesome thing. So that Bethany now is about an hour away from Jerusalem, because you have to go to a gate in the wall and pass through the security measures at that gate. I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end of this session. So Bethany is 1.5 miles. They talk in kilometers. We're talking miles. 1.5 miles from Jerusalem. So Jesus is not in Bethany. There's no wall then to protect him. being on the right side or the Palestinian side of Bethany. So John tells us that Jesus is somewhere. He's not in Bethany or not near Bethany. And the word gets to him that Lazarus, his great friend, along with Martha and Mary, the sisters of Lazarus, that Lazarus is ill. What's interesting is that somebody in that household, Mary, Martha, or Lazarus, knew where Jesus was because they got the message to him that Lazarus was ill. Jesus doesn't go right away. He waits 2 days. Now, we can play a game here called exegeting Scripture. Either he delays purposely because he's debating whether to go back in the environs of Jerusalem, or he's deciding what he's going to do about this fact that Lazarus is ill. Jesus understands Lazarus is very near death. Why doesn't he go right away to his side of his great friend? And, you know, one of the reasons is maybe he's trying to think about what to do. Or maybe he's setting up the miracle all the way back here at the beginning of the story. And since John knows the story and knows how it ends and knows all the things from here to here, my guess is that's John's intent, is saying he waited 2 days before he went. Jesus is setting up what's going to happen at the conclusion of this story. Just piece number one. Piece number two. The dialogue with the disciples is Lazarus is ill. And let's go to his side. And the disciples say, in the TED's authorized version, the TAV, "You're nuts! You can't go back to Jerusalem. They're looking for you to stone you." So then he explains that Lazarus is asleep. And they said, "That's fine, because if you sleep, you get well." And he said, "No, you don't understand. Lazarus is dead. So we're going." He's made the decision. We're going. The disciples are still unhappy about that, and it's Thomas who speaks up. Remember, we call him Doubting Thomas. He's one of the people in the crowd. I always love preaching on the Sunday after Easter. That's usually Assistant Pastor Sunday when the senior pastor rests. But you often didn't let my assistant preach that Sunday because it's about Thomas. And you know, we call him Doubting Thomas, but if you think about it and listen to the story closely, Thomas wasn't asking for any more than the other disciples had already had. They had seen Jesus. Thomas had not. Unless I thrust my fingers in a nail hole and thrust my hand to his side, I can't believe. Thomas is a tough kind of guy. But it's Thomas who speaks up and says, "Let us go and die with it." Thomas, who's been a deal in Christian history for 2,000 years. Thomas is one of the rocks. Thomas will die, it says, by flaying knives, skinned alive in India as a martyr. Doubting Thomas. Anyway, let's read the story now as it begins. And I look on the page and I'll tell you where it begins. Begins on page 2, I think. Yep, page 2, middle of the page, reading the text. Follow it along as Sylvia reads it for us.
Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the oil with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you. Are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble, because the light is not in them." After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, so that we may die with him."
Okay, that's all introduction to the story. Where he was, how he responded, what he thinks. Clearly, by the time we get to the end of that portion, Jesus knows what he's going to do. Lazarus is dead. When he gets to Bethany, he will find that Lazarus had been in the tomb 4 days. Now, in Hebrew tradition, when possible, a person is buried by sundown of the day of their death. So he's been dead 4 days. We will learn that when Jesus gets here. When he arrives, he will meet Martha just outside of the town of Bethany, and she rather confronts him. "Lord, if you would have been here when my brother had died, if you'd been here when my brother would not have died." Get it right. And is she chewing him out for not coming? That's the first idea. Or is it just that grief says what we're really feeling? Maybe even some anger with her friend. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." It's kind of, isn't that saying it's your fault? He's dead. Now this is friends. He stayed at their house. Another difference is the synoptics tell us that Jesus went to Jerusalem one time after his birth narrative. But John tells us at least 3 trips that Jesus makes to Jerusalem. And his Marriott hotel was the Lazarus, Martha, and Mary's home in Bethany. It was just, after I said, 1.5 miles from Jerusalem. So this is an intense friendship, a valued friendship. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." It has to do with how she said it. It probably tells us what she meant. And we're going to get to that in a minute. In fact, why wait? What she said was, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Even so, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will do it for you." He says to Martha, "Your brother shall rise again in the resurrection of the last day." People tell us that all the time when a friend or family member dies. But what we're feeling is, but they're dead now. And so Jesus continues the conversation. "Martha, your brother shall rise again on the resurrection of the last." And she says, "I know that he'll rise again on the resurrection of the last day." And he said, "I am the resurrection and life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And he who lives and believes in me will never die. And then he turns to Martha and he says, Martha, do you really believe this? What a confrontation. It's one for one, one-on-one. Jesus has the word. I am the resurrection of the life. Her response is, yes, Lord, I believe. I know you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, who's coming into the world. Where did she get that? Maybe that's John's memory giving Martha a little more theology than she had. I'm not sure. But the dialogue is precious. On the front of the paper, there is the picture of this little tiny Orthodox chapel. It is believed in the Bethany School for Girls, a Russian Orthodox school of the Russian Orthodox outside of Russia church. Well, when they were building the school, a little later you'll see a picture of this school. When they were building the school for girls, which was originally a hotel for pilgrims, which was the same as Augusta Victoria, which I'll talk about in a moment, they were both hostels, hotels. Not, hospice today means a place you go where you agree to die, but hostel was kind of a hotel for pilgrims. And the Russian Orthodox order of nuns in Jerusalem built this hotel just after 1900, and so did Kaiser Wilhelm for the German pilgrims, and he named it after his wife Augusta Victoria. It's now Augusta Victoria Hospital in Jerusalem. I'll talk about that in a minute before the clock shuts us down. So here we have this story and this kind of theological conversation where he says, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever lives and believes in me shall never die. And then he says, what do you think about this? And she said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, who is coming into the world. Now that's the next part we're going to read. The chapel, when we finish the chapel is built on the spot it is believed Martha met Jesus on the road outside of Bethany proper. Why? Because when they were building the hotel in 1903 or something like that, while they were building the hotel, they uncorked flattened stones, and in one of the stones was chiseled, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he did. And it says, Martha heard Jesus say these words for the very first time. That stone has been dated to the 5th century. So it's believed that this was part of the Roman road, along with some adjacent flattened stones, part of the Roman road going from Jericho up to Jerusalem. So when these were found, and chapel is relatively recent, sometime after 1900, this chapel, which is called the Chapel of St. Martha, is there, marking the spot where it's believed since the 5th century and probably before, that Martha and Jesus had this conversation. We don't get anything about the chapel in John's story because it wasn't there when John wrote the story. It is a tiny little chapel. About 2 people will fit into it, Jesus and Martha. It takes more than that to celebrate a Russian Orthodox Mass. I don't know, but the altar is set up for Mass 24/7. And sometimes a Mass is done there. So that's enough. Want to read part 2, and I think we're on page 3, 4. All right, let's do it.
When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world."
Now you say, Pastor Ted, she said, you are the Christ. Christ, Messiah, same word, different translation. One's Latin, one's Hebrew. One other thing I should have mentioned is this crowd that comes to mourn with the sisters and with Lazarus' family and friends. They will play a role both during this story and after it next week. And we'll talk about that in time. So they will arrive at the tomb. This hearing, Martha goes back home, says to Mary, "The master is inquiring about you." I think that might have been, I don't remember that Jesus asked, "Where's Mary?" Mary was always concerned about household duties, cooking, all that kind of stuff. Martha was always concerned more about religious things. She's the one that went out along the road looking for the arrival of Jesus. Mary is still home. I should have mentioned that. So, as you see, she goes quickly to Jesus, confronts him the same. They must have rehearsed this, confronts him the same. "If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." But they don't have the theological dialogue after it. That wouldn't have been Mary. That would have been Martha. So, that first thing. John then interrupts the narrative to share with us Jesus' location. He's still outside of Bethany. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. He further adds that when the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary rise quickly, they followed her. So now we've got a crowd that are going to follow the rest of this event. Back to Mary. As I mentioned, she makes the same observation. "Lord, if you'd come when we called you, he wouldn't have died." But that doesn't go on from there. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews came and with her were weeping, he was deeply moved and asked the obvious question, "Where have you laid him?" So we could probably go on from there. And it's on page 5.
May I interrupt and ask?
Sure.
Isn't it rather
You knew you would anyway.
isn't it presumptuous of Mary and of Martha both to say, "If you had been here, you would not have died"?
Well, there's two issues. Angry people don't worry about procedure, or hurt people don't worry about procedure or social things. They say pretty largely what's on their mind. And they were close friends. She had a right to speak her mind, as did Martha did, and they did. Let me go back to page 4. I forgot to do one thing. I should have done it. At 2 pictures there to make me do it. This is the top picture to the right is the doorway to Lazarus' tomb. This has been believed to be Lazarus' tomb since the 3rd century. Now, why do I speak of it as 3rd century? Uh, the Romans desecrated and, when they could, destroyed every Christian holy site, because until 312 it was illegal with the penalty of death to be a Christian. So wherever there was a Christian site, the Romans brought a 1st century bulldozer in and put a gas station there or whatever. They totally defaced it. But when St. Helena, you remember St. Helena? We've talked about her often. When she went, she would go to Christians there and say, where was it? Where did it happen? And they knew. And then she would build in that destroyed place a church that fixed the foundations. And then for till about the 600s, that worked fine. There was nobody that could destroy that. The Persians did once, but then they never did it totally. So, at any rate, this goes back to the 3rd century. It's not a St. Helena site particularly, but the historic record goes back there. The picture on the other side is what happens when you go through that doorway. If you look to the left of that picture, you'll see the stairs coming down from the upper doorway into this huge room, which has a few carved tombs in it, but is largely an assembly room for burial procedures and so forth. If you look to the center, lower center of this picture, you'll see a light. You see the light at the bottom? That's the light lighting the crypt into which Lazarus is believed to have been placed. I went down there, I went in there, I've been there several times actually. People were shorter then, so I tried. Lazarus would have been cramped because I was. Anyhow, these two places are authentic and are kept very generous. And since Lazarus is also the equivalent of a saint in Islam, this is a very important place to Islam as well as to Christianity. Therefore, it has been largely preserved. Yeah. We would assume that Lazarus was Jewish, as were his 2 sisters, and they were not inclined to become followers of Muhammad in blunt language, because Muhammad hadn't been born yet. Because Islam is based on Old Testament and some New Testament saints. The Quran includes them. Why did Muhammad do that? Who it's claimed wrote the entire Quran? I don't know. We'll have to ask him someday. I'm sorry, I can't give a better answer to that. I don't purport to be an authority in Islam either. But you've got 600 years between Muhammad and Christ. Muhammad coming second. Now let's read the passage.
When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. Did I read the same thing twice?
Yeah, but that's all right. It didn't hurt us to hear it
I'm
again.
sorry.
Don't
As I was
forget-
reading, I thought,
That's because we
familiar."
went back and looked at those pictures.
I'm
Don't fret. Now just keep reading and you'll be on target.
When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were there with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?"
Thank you. Yeah.
Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. I know that thou hearest me always, but I have said this on account of the people standing by, that they may believe that thou didst send me.
Okay.
Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upwards and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and his feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go."
Now, let's go back in our memories to the first section that we read. When Jesus said, "Lazarus is dead, I go to awaken him." Remember that? All right. The reason I say that is in that first section, John told us what was going to happen from where Jesus was, how this was going to progress, and he knew from wherever he was. I would guess he was down near Bethany beyond Jordan in the wilderness near John. But he knew before he started to Bethany what was going to happen there. And he said it was in order to reveal the glory of God. So that's the story. John has gone to all this trouble to stage it for us, walk us through it, and then bring us to the climax. He's only told us one story, and he's taken all this space in the 11th chapter. Next week, we go on from here. That crowd that came to weep with Mary and Martha about the death of John, of Lazarus, is in fact not all made up of hard believers. And we'll find out that some of them went to the authorities because of what Jesus had done. Some of their friends. That's part 2 of the same story. And it takes us into the 12th chapter, but that's next week. I haven't said anything about Bethany, and part of the goal about this issue was to introduce us to the town then and now. The Bible consistently talks about Bethany as a village. You know, that's been a little bit of an argument in the Gospels about whether Nazareth was a city or a village last week. But the Bible is pretty consistent saying Bethany is simply a suburb of Jerusalem, and it's a village. It's where the Palm Sunday parade was staged, where the parade marshal put it all together. Anyhow, that next week. But today it's almost as big as modern Nazareth. Remember we said Nazareth was just under 12,000. This is 11,200 and something in Bethany. It's called Al-Azara, which is Arabic for the town of Lazarus. So if you go and ask to find Bethany, the natives won't know what you're talking about, because the modern name is the town of Lazarus, and it's in Arabic. But it's a big place and a busy place. It is also an Area C, which is one of the 3 areas from the Oslo agreements, in which we have full, pretty much Palestinian Authority management, to shared management, which is the worst place to live because nobody takes up the garbage if there's a fight about who's supposed to be responsible for the garbage. If you're totally responsible, it takes care of. Here in Bethany is such a turbulent town that as a result of its turbulence, the Israelis have total control in Bethany. It's an unhappy town. Hamas had it for a while, and it was unhappier still. Most of the violence directed toward the school we're going to talk about now was during the reign of Hamas, but there's still trouble with the Palestinian Authority as well. So first of all, we'll talk about what's happening today among Christians in the Holy Land. I want to talk about a school I've visited several times, a person I count now as a special friend, who's the administrator, dean of the school, and principal. I've known her as Sister Martha for all these times. She's a Russian Orthodox nun, part of the convent on the other side of the wall in Bethany, where Bethany is sliced in half by this circuitous wall. So it's an hour-and-a-half trip by bus for her to go to Mass at the convent. And because it's a Christian school in a almost totally Arab town, it has ongoing violence. Violence as like your neighbor building on your property and having to have them removed, and having a building torn down, and getting authorities to do it, and how long it takes the authorities to move against an Arab in behalf of a Christian cause. How we wake up one morning and there's no water because they've shot out the water tank on the roof of the school. Hamas driving up, 2 men with AK-47s in a Jeep, saying, "You must close this school and you have 24 hours to do it. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll start taking girls as hostages until this school is closed." When they celebrated the 75th anniversary of the school, they came and said, "You can have no alcoholic beverages." This is the Russians. You have to have alcoholic beverages to have a celebration. Vodka. And she said, "We normally drink." I said, "Sister, what did you do?" She said, "We drank." What did she do about coming and taking the girls hostage? Hamas. She called all the parents because the school now has just under 400, and it up and down, 400 Arab students who are from families in Bethany because this school constantly wins awards for its academic excellence. It teaches 3 languages, Russian, because the liturgy is done in Russian. The 3 languages, English, Hebrew, and Russian. Arab they come knowing. They teach in Russian. They came and told her that she can no longer teach Bible for the Christians there. This was Palestinian Authority, Palestinian Education Board. She could no longer teach Bible. And she had to teach 5 days of Quran. Well, she said, I think 5 days of Quran is too much. And we said, what do you do about Bible? She smiles and she says, we have Mass every day. And we teach Bible at Mass every day, and they haven't figured it out. So it's this indomitable spirit that just, well, she called the parents of the local girls and said they're coming to take children hostage tomorrow. The mothers formed a chain around the school. They drove up with a Jeep with AK-47s here with the mothers holding hands around the school. There's 400 mothers out there. And they drove away, and it never took the children, and the thing was over. And she's smiling. She almost thinks it's fun to be miserable to them. So, anyhow, this is one of the awesome ministries of the church today, and it affects. Some of their students are orphans. You know, they're born. I got to do this quickly. They're born in out of wedlock, and they get dropped off, sometimes only hours old, at the creche in Bethlehem. Translate that, the manger. It's a Roman Catholic nursery school that takes these children. They have no last names. They don't know who they are. They don't know where they came from. And until they have a last name and have an identity, no rights are available to them in the Palestinian system. So they go up with no last name until they get here in the high school. And they still have no last name, except most of these girls will marry, and they'll get a last name, and it'll either be Islamic or Christian, and then they move on. But this school started mostly orphans. As I said today, now the parents, having turned down the Palestinian education system, Arab parents enroll their school, pay the tuition, and they graduate. They have about 400. There's percentage today, 20 Christians. So at any rate, it's a incredible presence of our Lord in some very healing ways. You'll see a picture of their chorus singing at the 75th anniversary. You'll see now Mother Martha. She's been so successful, she's been promoted. She's now Mother Martha instead of Sister Maria. And you see the smile. It never leaves. And she loves telling the stories of the battles she won. And that's a rather looking picture. One of the very unique ministries and the tremendous effect it has on preaching the gospel, because they are able to preach the gospel and do education. Finally, the Lutheran World Federation, Augusta Victoria Hospital, 1947. In the aftermath of World War II, the Lutheran World Federation, and you'll see a paragraph about how big it is, 99 different denominations, 77 million Lutherans, worldwide organization. No, Missouri's not in it. They have their own. But issue being Augusta Victoria Hospital is run by the Lutheran World Federation. And in 1967 war, the Israelis bombed the third story off of the hospital. It was the children's ward. They had no money to replace it, so forth and so on. Finally, Israelis made reparations. They built the neonatal unit, birthing and caring for infants. The neonatal unit that wasn't matchable until you get to Switzerland or Cairo. But they had to close it because, you know, when a mother needs to deliver, she needs to do it now. But getting through the checkpoints often had the deliveries on the other side of the checkpoint. So they had to close that. Now there's a palliative care unit, and there will soon be a palliative care unit, pain magicians, so to speak, to be in that space. Because now it's been rebuilt again, and it's just a crazy kind of situation. But I once had a guide with a group I had in the Holy Land who said, "I hear you're Lutheran." Yeah. Well, you know that's a safe conduct pass anywhere in Palestine. My sister is a nurse. She graduated from Augusta Victoria's nursing school. You have clinics all over Palestine. Food, counseling, financial support. That's the Lutheran message. I've given you 2 pages right off the internet. You can scan that and read it. And I'll give back 10 minutes they took away from me. Thank you so much. See you next week. And I'll sit here for questions as long as you have them.